Broadcasting live in the shadow of the Mario Lanza Museum, permeating steel structures, impervious to conventional radio waves. This is Radio Voice Italia. You're listening to Radio Voice Italia, coming to you live and broadcasting from our new broadcast home at Cafe D'Angelo at 26 East Eagle Road in Havertown, Pennsylvania, the home of Radio Voice Italia. We hope you'll make plans to be part of our live broadcast audience the first Wednesday of the month at Cafe D'Angelo. It's now officially 6 p.m. Boulevard time. Broadcasting live in the shadow of the Mario Lanza Museum in the heart of South Philadelphia. This is Radio Voice Italia. This is the official radio voice of Mario Lanza.
Joe Morinelli.
You don't need to drag out your grandfather's old shortwave radio to listen to Radio Voice Italia. You can listen online on your smartphone, tablet, laptop, or desktop computer. Radio Voice Italia. No boundaries. Broadcasting to every corner of the globe. This is Radio Voice Italia. Broadcasting in crystal clear sound.
Radio Voice Italia.
Okay, what you're hearing now is something that our next guest took a big part in.
SEPTA maintains and operates nearly 300 miles of commuter rail, over 300 miles of light rail. We have about 30 miles of electric trolley bus, over 20 miles of heavy rail system. All our substations, all our switches are controlled remotely from a central control point, our command center.
On this floor, SEPTA is in communication with all the vehicles that it operates.
Operators can open a breaker on a remote location. The substation is located 40 miles from here. The information on our PA systems comes from here. Switches can be operated from here. Train dispatchers can throw a switch and make a train switch tracks as necessary. They can route a train through the system using our control center here.
We're one of the few transit properties in the nation that runs the magnitude of service.
We have over 2,700 vehicles that we put out on the street every day, and we have all the operators that get on those vehicles. So there is a lot of work that are done by every single district, by every single maintenance shop, by a lot of departments to put people, engineers, operators on a vehicle, and that vehicle to be reliable.
Our job is to make sure that the service is maintained on an on-time performance, make sure that the people know that they need to go to a different stop if there's going to be a detour, provide safe, accurate, on-time service to the public.
My job is to keep the service going. It's to, no matter what happens, whether adverse weather, storms, a fatality, which is extremely unfortunate, my job is to actually keep trains moving, to keep some type of service going on the affected lines.
We are the only property in the United States that has all the different modes of transportation.
We run bus service, subway service, light rail trolley, both trolley on street traffic, trolley on dedicated right-of-way, and we have an extensive commuter rail operation. All those groups are housed here in the control center. It is an integrated process with all the modes working under one report.
Every day we transport approximately 500,000 people. We have 1,180 buses on the street during what would be considered rush hour time.
On a given day, we haul approximately on the Market Frankfurt line about 180,000. Broad Street is about 150,000. The Route 100 is about 80, give or take. The immediate Sharon Hill is about, I would say about 50,000. The Green Line total is up there. It's up to about 80,000 or maybe close to 100.
On average day in the life of the control center, it never really ends. It's a 24/7 operation. It's continuously moving. We have staff around the clock that constantly supports the service that we provide out on the street.
This center never sleeps. There's always a handful or more people on this floor 24/7.
I always describe this job as like a fireman. We come to work, Alarm goes off, we had to react.
Every day, you don't know what you're getting into. Some days you get a dog biting an operator. You getting a patient falling out of a wheelchair. You got to react.
At any minute, you could get that call or an incident could happen where everything has to stop and you're focusing, working to deal with a major incident. And kind of the uncertainty, the unknown, when is that going to happen? Will it happen? Certain days we have nice calm days and other days it can get chaotic. So you have to be able to respond in an instant. You have to be able to start making quick decisions.
There's something new every day. I mean, a storm's great. I love working a storm. You know, it's different. You know, looking at that map and trying to figure out how you're going to get that bus out.
An average day is never really truly an average day. We always have something going on out of the ordinary.
There's never a time that's boring. You hit the ground running, and it's not just coming to work, but when you leave, you still think about this place. I think about this place. You know, we're always in communication, making sure that we're doing the right thing.
Okay, what a great piece. And our special guest tonight is a producer of that piece. It's called SEPTA in Motion. He's a producer, a documentary maker, and he's the host of his own show on public TV, and that's out of Radnor, Studio 21. It's a pleasure to have John Ricciutti tonight as our guest on Radio Voice Italia. Hi, John.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for coming here.
Thank you for inviting me to Cafe D'Angelo. Had a wonderful, great meal here, and
oh, it's terrific.
No, food is excellent. Come on out. It's your type of place.
Absolutely.
My type of place.
Okay, we opened with, of course, just the opening 4 or 5 minutes of that epic production, and you are, of course, a co-producer. What can you tell us about that?
It's a study of the SEPTA's control center. It's something that the rider or customer never sees, or in many cases doesn't realize. The average rider gets on the bus or a trolley or train, and it goes and takes them to where they want to go. But there's people that man that control center that regulate the safe passage of trains and buses and keeping the schedule, that are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Having worked for SEPTA for over 40 years, I knew how all this worked. So once I got into public television, it was my thought that I actually wanted to write memoirs, and I've started to do that. However, the thought was posed to me that, you know, why don't we do, once I got into television, why don't we do a documentary on making inside a control center?
Absolutely, and it's quite a documentary. I learned so much, and as you say, people take it for granted. They take SEPTA day in and day out.
Yeah, and so we wanted to show a viewer what actually went on inside a control center. What kind of action took place on a continuing basis. So we filmed the documentary from inside the control center, and we filmed at various parts. You know, we filmed trolleys, buses in service. We filmed everything that would make the viewer look at that and say, "Wow, I did not know that." And that's what we did.
The control room is incredible, and it rivals some of the government facilities, probably.
Well, one of the things we did when we started working on this documentary is we actually got a tour of the control center in Grand Central Station in New York, or Grand Central Terminal in New York, and we looked inside their control center. We had a view of it, and I actually thought that what SEPTA was doing, it was equally as good as anything that they were doing in New York. They just were doing it on a larger scale. They of course have, you know, the subway and the buses and the Long Island Railroad, etc. But anything that SEPTA does, which is Philadelphia's Transit Authority, and anything that they do is certainly is as good as anything done anywhere else. And of course, we were proud to say, if you look at the documentary, which you can find on YouTube, SEPTA in Motion, it's a diverse group that works in there. There's men, women, and there's various ethnicities in there.
You can see there's a lot of passion in the work they do.
Yes, there's a lot of there's a lot of caring. The people like each other, and when you're working as close with someone as you and I are right now in this interview, there's a level of tension that builds up over things that occur in the course of a day. There's snowstorms. There was the Philadelphia Phillies parade. There's various things that come about, and those things cause tensions. But when like myself, when I stepped away from it as a producer and looked at it, and I said, these people really do care about each other. And the people that are in the documentary, that people look at that documentary and they say, well, that was scripted, or those people. No, it wasn't. Those interviews that we did, and that they were candid. There was no script.
That appeared to me that that was exactly coming from your experience.
Yeah, they were just talking from their heart. So that's what made it all very good. And as a result of that, of course, we won an Emmy for film editing. I was disappointed I didn't get one for a producer, but we still were the.
Well, let me tell you, you were part of the team and you made it possible. And speaking of making it possible, you were a big part of SEPTA for many years, and you were the liaison for the production. So, I mean, you actually made everything come together.
Right. It was my relationship with SEPTA that brought everybody together. SEPTA takes a lot of hits for things that they shouldn't. A lot of things that happen in SEPTA's progress are the result of other agencies, whether it's the water company or whether it's the electric company or whether it's somebody, but SEPTA always takes the blame for it. And I know I was a former director of transportation in SEPTA before I retired, and I managed 2 work locations. And I do know that there are things that you can't have any control over. Our initiative is always to get the service out on the street, to operate the service 24/7, no matter what the conditions are. But there's things that you can't overcome, and that's important that somebody gets to see that. So my relationship with SEPTA, I left on good terms. We liked each other when I left, and when I retired. And I got to go back, and they were very, very generous and benevolent in allowing me to do this documentary. I actually, quite honestly, Joe, I was nervous because coming from a corporate environment, I thought to myself, oh, what's this? Is this going to look like a wedding reception?
Sure.
I don't want to say which group, but I was saying to myself, is this going to look like a wedding reception? And I was nervous as we went along. And I had no experience with working with artistic types, especially film editors, because they're the ones that make everything work. They put the whole thing together.
Absolutely.
The whole thing together. So I thought, is this going to look bad? So when I sent a trailer to SEPTA's public relations department, they were like, I didn't look at it. I didn't look. I said, I'm just going to send it to them.
Oh, wow.
And they called me up and they said, John, I can't believe how good this is. We thought it was going to look like a wedding reception, and it really turned out to be great. And in fact, when the Emmy Awards came about, the executive producers and I had talked about going to the Emmy Awards, and we said, no, we're not going to go. It's $125 a ticket, and we're not going to win anyway. So why bother going?
Wow,
so on Monday morning, he calls me up, and George Strimmel is the director of the station. He calls me up and says, John, are you sitting down? I said, yeah, why? Because we won an Emmy. I said, you're kidding.
How about that?
I called my wife and I told her the same thing. I said, Joan, and my wife's name's Joan.
Yeah.
And I said to her, Joan, are you sitting down? She said, yeah, why? I said, because we won an Emmy. I had to pull the car over.
And they paid for your tickets, I hope, at that point.
Nobody paid for anything.
They didn't pay for your tickets.
Still waiting for the statue.
See, there's no reciprocal agreement between SEPTA and that.
No.
Okay.
No. But anyway, that was the excitement of doing it. And actually, Joe, we are actually going to start working with another documentary in 2016 on the history of the mainline railroad.
Oh, that's great. There's a lot of interest in that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there is. And we've since partnered, Radnor Studio 21 has partnered with Mainline Public Television in Lower Merion, and we are now going to use their historical society to do some stuff there.
That's great. Now, you have a long history with SEPTA. You started as a bus driver for a short time.
A union bus driver, yes.
I may have been on your bus, you know.
No, were you treated badly?
No, but I feel that, we're the same age, basically.
Okay.
You graduated from my alma mater.
Upper Darby High School?
Upper Darby. You graduated with my sister. And I graduated, Doris Morinelli, and the first time I ever acknowledged her. I graduated a few years later in 71. What are you, 67?
67.
Yeah, she's
yes.
67. I'm 71, Upper Darby. Where were
Yeah.
you living at the time?
We lived on Wayne Avenue in Upper Darby,
Oh, I know where that is.
right off of State Road.
I know where it is.
Yes, we lived there, and we moved. Actually, my parents, my father's from Rhode Island, and my father met my mother when he was in the Navy in South Philadelphia, and my parents actually lived in Rhode Island for a while. My father didn't like the bakery he was working in, so he packed up one day. That's the type of person he was. And they moved to Philadelphia, and he opened up his own business in South Philadelphia along with someone else, and then we eventually migrated to Upper Darby.
Great, how about that? That's great. And your mother, what part of Philadelphia?
South Philadelphia.
South
She's from well, if you want to know specifically.
Yeah, the street.
To
Is
the
that
point,
okay?
Porter
Is it okay
Street,
if we,
15th and Porter.
Okay.
They were members of St. Monica's Parish.
That's it. My mother too. So my mother was married there. See?
My aunt was the seamstress. My aunt was the seamstress for the priest there. And when my aunt passed away, we cleaned out her house on Porter Street, and my wife actually got one of the garments that the priests wear, and she actually wears it as a dress. She actually had to look stunning.
How about that?
It should be a motivation for the church to put to have a woman in there as
that's incredible.
as a deacon.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Okay, so we opened the show talking about your documentary, and also, though, we need to tell everyone that you have a weekly talk show on public television, and it does come out of the famous Radnor Studio 21.
Yeah,
and let's hear more about your weekly show.
Well, the weekly show is interesting. Let me tell you how I started in it. After I retired from SEPTA, I watched this show, and I watched Radnor Studio 21 on Friday nights because I like the British movies.
Me too. I love British movies.
Well, one day I went there, and I was talking to the director, and I told him I had worked for SEPTA, and he said, and I knew, I told him what role I played in SEPTA, and he said, would you like to do a television show about transportation? And I thought to myself, are you kidding? How about talk?
Last thing on my mind.
Yeah, okay, sure. I said, sure. How are you? He took me into the studio, and he says, here, sit in front of the cameras. There were 3 cameras, which is what we have. We have a regular television studio, and I said, I like cameras, so I'm good there. So we did a kind of a thing, and I wasn't too crazy about it, but
well, we are our worst critics.
Yeah, well, I guess. So anyway, he said we'd like to do a show called Radnor Rail Roundtable, and it's about we want to talk about transportation on a weekly basis. So I brought in a lot of SEPTA people that I knew, including the current general manager, Jeff Knuppel. At the time, he was the deputy general manager. And I brought him in, and in fact, recently I interviewed the retiring Joe Casey, and I did shows, and I said, I said, George, I'd like to do stuff other than this.
There you go.
I want to do things about things that interest me, like artists and
public interest.
Anything that comes along. I said, I mean, our motto is anything that's entertaining or artistic or educational is Radnor Studio 21's interested in, because let me just throw a kudo out here for Radnor Studio 21. We don't do like politicians and people that are running for the school board, or we do things that are, as I said, that are educational, informative, and entertaining. So I said to George, I said, George, why don't let me do some other things. So I started to contact authors, and then I started to contact veterans. And one thing led to another. I interviewed a veteran who was from the POW from Vietnam. He was a pilot. I don't know if you know the name of Ralph Galati.
I do, sure.
Okay, well, I interviewed Ralph Galati. He spent 400 days in the Hanoi Hilton. And Ralph came to me one day and he said, listen, are you interested in doing this? And he handed me this document. And it was from the Library of Congress. and they have strict guidelines about doing interviews. You have to do them in a secluded place, etc.
Yeah, I was doing oral histories for a while years ago.
So then you know what I'm talking about. So I interviewed Ralph, and then that led to another one. Well, so now I've done about 20 interviews with the Library of Congress. I then contacted George Anastasia, who'd written a couple books about the mob.
He's the man, George.
So after George's latest book, Gandhi's Rules, a very fascinating story, has a charismatic character in it named John A. Light. So I said to Ralph, to George Anastasia, I said, George, how can I get in touch with John A. Light? He goes, he's really hard to get a hold of, and he truly is. Well, one day he pops up on Facebook. He saw my interview with George Anastasia, and he tells me I'm the person in the thing. I said, okay, would you like to do a television show? So I invited him on.
That came together real well.
Right. So now my bridge of interviews includes priests, college professors, authors, cooks, and gangsters.
Gangsters. There you go.
Real gangsters.
The real McCoy, right?
Yes.
Well, let me tell you this. You interviewed quite an array of people over the years, some pretty big names, local and then some. Michael Chitwood is on your list.
Yes, I interviewed Michael Chitwood twice. He was one of my favorite people to interview because he was very candid. He was not as he is sometimes described. Mike is a very honest guy. He's written a book, not in my neighborhood, scumbag, and it's a very good book. And I have a good rapport with Michael. And he actually went from a Philadelphia Police Department. He was I don't know if your audience knows who Michael Chitwood is, but he was the most decorated homicide detective in the history of Philadelphia Police Departments. He didn't serve for 18 years. He left, where he went to Middletown Township in Bucks County. He went from Middletown Township to Bucks County, and then he went to into Eddie Bauer country in Maine.
Okay.
And then from Maine, he came back to Philadelphia and Upper Darby, where he's revered. I personally think he's a terrific police enforcer. I know a lot of people have their own opinions about Michael, but I think he's fabulous.
They do. I think he was very good for Upper Darby Township. That's all I can say.
He is very good for, yes.
He's like Elliot Ness a little.
I also most recently interviewed Dave Gentile. But we're on the subject of crime and et cetera. Dave Gentile is the current Inspector General of the Delaware River Port Authority, and he was the person responsible for bringing in Nicky the Crow Caramondi.
Oh, Nicky the Crow.
Nicky the Crow. Now Nicky the Crow is the protagonist in George Anastasia's book Blood and Honor, and he came in, and George Anastasia will credit to this day Dave Gentile for giving him this person, and Dave is an interesting guy because he's a big man. He's not your what you might think as a typical FBI agent, where he's big. He's Elliot Ness-esque, and he tells a great story. He told me on television, so I can repeat it, that he was in a restaurant, La Veranda, in Philadelphia, and he in there is Joey Merlino.
Oh boy!
And he says in his interview with me that he looks around because he was with someone, and he says something stinks in here, and he goes, "Oh, I know what it is. It's Joey Merlino," and he points to him. And some of Merlino's...
You're talking about me.
Some of Merlino's associates got up, and they stood up, and Dave Gentile, who's about 6'2" and 250 pounds, turns around and looks at him and moves his jacket back where you can see the FBI badge and his gun. And they sat down, and Dave said, "I'll be outside if you guys want to talk to me."
That's great.
That's great. He's a fascinating guy. He's an interesting person.
Now, you also interviewed CIA agents, I believe, and I guess they'll remain nameless for this program.
Yes, she's actually an author, but not a lot of people know that she was a former agent, and what's interesting about her, she was recruited while she was a senior at the University of Minnesota. And I asked her, how did you get, what is it how did you get recruited? And she said, well, I had something special that they were interested in. And I was always fascinated by what that something special was. But to this day, she hasn't told me. I'm still very friendly with her. And she lives in the area. But what's fascinating about her is she worked for Estee Lauder. And she originally was, when she graduated college, she became a fashion writer. So from being a fashion writer, Estee Lauder picked her up, and she became Mrs. Lauder's right-hand person. So she was in Moscow when Estee Lauder opened up a shop.
Oh, Perestroika, they opened up a shop. Yes. I remember when they opened up McDonald's.
Well, I said to her, were you an agent? And she said, yeah. I said, you were an agent at the time. You're in the room with Gorbachev and his wife? And she said, oh, yeah, wait, it gets better. She said, Mrs. Gorbachev forgot her purse. So Mrs. Lauder said, I said, wait a minute, did Mrs. Lauder know that you're an agent? She says, no, I don't think so. She ever knew. I said, Gorbachev had to know. And she said, well, I don't know whether he knew or not. So she said, I took the purse because they sent a limo for me, and they drove me back to Gorbachev's house. And I went in there, and I said, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's just a fascinating story. She also told me about how Picasso asked her to take 2 paintings for her out of France and bring them to Spain with her. And she put them in the trunk of an old Peugeot. And when she got the paintings, as they were being transferred to her, some oil spilled on the paintings.
Oh my goodness.
So one day she was looking at the paintings, and she saw in the New York Times that the paintings were for sale for an extraordinary amount of money. And of course they had oil stains on them. And she said, and the person who was describing the artwork was saying, looking at the shadows of the artwork and the paintings, and she knew that they were oil stains, and she thought, how hideous is it? The painting sold for obviously over $2 million. But the best story she told me real quick, I'll tell you, she said to me, the agent, the CIA wanted to take her out of the country, so they put her in the Caribbean, and I figure that's where she was working along. She also had an apartment in Paris with Estee Lauder. So she's in the Caribbean, and there's a good part of this story. There's a love story attached to this.
Oh, we like those endings.
So she's in the Caribbean, and she goes through the process of buying a house in St. Bart's. Well, she has a house, and then while she's in Paris or her family's home in Minnesota, a perfect storm comes along and destroys the house completely gone. So I said, well, no problem. So I called the insurance company, and I'll tell them my house got destroyed. So she called the insurance company and says, listen, my house in, blah, blah street was destroyed in the hurricane. And they said, what house?
Oh, Maron.
There was no house. So that's how she knew that went. But the good part about it, that's where she met her husband.
See, there you go.
And of course, she had a very happy marriage. She doesn't have any children, and it was her one and only marriage, and unfortunately her husband died prematurely, but she's a very, very interesting lady, lives locally, and she's still a good friend of mine, and I communicate with her regularly.
That's great. You make a lot of friends along the way doing these shows.
Yes, you do.
Charlie Gracie, a common friend of ours, he's just a terrific person.
Charlie Gracie, I got to know because we did, Radnor Studio 21 is working in partnership with Character Driven Productions, Sean Swords, and myself, and we teamed up. We did Irish. We actually did Italian guy. We did some contract work for Irish television in the UK. Irish television in the UK has worldwide actually has 16 million subscribers. So we did for Irish television the Irish perspective on the papal visit. Through that process, we did some work with Charlie Gracie, and I got to know Charlie on a personal level, and actually I'm going this Saturday night with my wife Joan to Our Lady of Lourdes Parish to see Charlie's Christmas show with Father Michael Rock.
We're going to try to make that. Are we open for Saturday night?
Yeah, Saturday night, 6 o'clock. Our Lady of Lourdes Parish, Father Michael Rock is treating me to an Italian dinner. His chef Laura's going to cook it for me.
Let me ask you an important question here. Let's get this straight for the record. Is it sauce or is it gravy?
It's gravy if it's meat. It's sauce if it's sauce. It was always gravy in my house.
Okay, it was gravy in our house.
My mother
too.
always made gravy, but it was...
Lorraine Rinaldi made a fortune, I hear. That's the title of her book. Am I right or wrong?
No, it's called Gravy Wars.
It's gravy.
I interviewed Lorraine. I interviewed Lorraine on television. And
that's great.
Yeah, Lorraine is a fabulous guest.
She's good. I check out her website.
Yep.
Absolutely. Andrea DeFabio, another common friend.
Yes.
She's terrific with her vinyl revival store.
Yes.
And she does more than that, of course.
Yeah, no, Andrea does, she does an Italian series. She has a great little setup in Lansdowne, Pennsylvania. And she also has this thing called the Vault. I have to give Andrea credit.
Oh, yeah.
When we did SEPTA in Motion, we didn't know what we were going to do with it after we got it. We had this thing in our hands, and we said, what are we going to do?
That was a perfect venue.
So I said to Andrea, do me a favor. Would you show this? She showed it that night. The first night was in February. It sold out. There were 40 people in that 40-person vault that she has, and we sold out. And we did a Q&A afterwards. And I'm forever grateful for Andrea.
It's great, very intimate, very cozy. It's a great venue to show off your work.
And on December 12th, Saturday, she's playing Sinatra music all day.
Oh, that's good.
For Frank's birthday, and there's going to be an open mic, and I hope that my voice is in good form.
Now, when is that coming up again? I want to make that.
Saturday, December 12th, and it's an all-day
December
event.
12th.
Usually our shop opens around 10, so I think that's when she's going to start showing I'm sorry, I said she's going to be playing Sinatra music.
Okay, we're going to try to make that. You know, there's a lot of Sinatra stories. A lot of Philadelphians had a brush with Frank Sinatra one way or another. But I've been sitting on a story since when he died. And I'm going to make the announcement before the end of the 100th year. And you might be very surprised about my Frank Sinatra story.
What curious about your story?
Well, all I can say is...
I do know somebody that parked cars at his wedding in Germantown.
I'll give you just a little teaser that when this came to fruition, Dee can tell you, only 2 people were basically privy to it as friends. And they told me that I should keep it under wraps. I should not tell my Frank Sinatra story.
Does it have anything to do with Ava Gardner?
And I'll tell you why. No, not at all. I'm going to tell you why. In fact, because you're the guest, being very candid here, I'm going to tell you why they told me not to make the announcement. And the reason is, number one reason is, Sid Marks still thought he was alive. Okay, the second story is that there may be repercussions from his family.
Really?
So I kept it under wraps all these years, and I waited and waited. It was actually heard at the time, in real time, by perhaps hundreds of thousands of people, but no one repeated it.
No.
So maybe they didn't want to, maybe they didn't believe it, whatever, but we have confirmation. It's all documented that this, in fact, took place. So I'm going to bring it out again.
Jeez, I wonder what Frank's family, what would they do if they were upset?
You know, they might look at it and say, you know what, maybe you kind of put the malarkey on Frank or something.
They certainly don't have any mob connections, do they?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think they have any.
Have you heard Nancy Sinatra's show?
No.
She has a
show?
Seriously Sinatra on Sirius Radio.
No, really, I did not know that.
Yeah, she does all Frank Sinatra, yeah.
And she plays music and talks about Dad?
Talks about that. Of course, we feature Mario Lanza music here on our show. You know, there's an obvious connection between Frank Sinatra and Mario, in that, you know, Mario did frequent Frank Sinatra's home in California, spent some time there, and she made that known during her show a couple times.
Oh, he's a good guy.
He is a good guy.
Was a good guy. South Philadelphia guy.
Absolutely. Now, you also interviewed some priests and convicted felons. Now, can I ask you a question? Were any of the convicted felons also a priest?
No.
Oh, they weren't? Okay, I just wanted to see if they were one and the same.
No. One of the felons I've interviewed, who's you can find on Facebook. No, I'm sorry, you can find him on YouTube. He is an advocate for children that have been sex offended, and he's an advocate for supporting them. He's a really good guy. The other person that I know is from George Anastasia's book, and that's John A. Light. And John A. Light had a rapport with Dave Gentili. Dave Gentili was a person who brought John A. Light from South America to the United States. John A. Light, incidentally, was an enforcer for the Gotti family. And he's outspoken. If you read Gotti's Rules, George Anastasia's book, and I know I sound like I'm stumping this book here, but it's a fascinating story about how John A. Light actually avoided Interpol and the FBI. He lived in I would say 6 or 7 different countries. Cuba. He funneled money from Canada down into the Cayman Islands, where he was able to stay on the run until eventually he turned himself in, where he did a 10-year jail sentence. But he's a charismatic guy. He's got some international recognition now. He's a motivational speaker. He goes on tours. He's been in the UK. He's got a following there. He's Albanian. He's not Italian. He's not Sicilian.
He's not Sicilian.
No, he's not Sicilian.
Wow.
So I also know another fella who's in Texas named Robert Borelli. Robert Borelli was also a mafia madman. And my wife and I were in Texas recently, and I had an opportunity to meet up with Robert. He's written a book called Mafia Madman, which you can buy on Amazon or in Barnes and Noble. And he's also has a great story of redemption on how he's actually helping children so that they don't turn out like he did. That seems to be the common theme of a lot of the fellows that had mob connections, that there's a certain level of redemption there that they wanted to put forth. Mm-hmm. The priests I interviewed were fascinating. Well, one of the most interesting priests that I interviewed was a priest by the name of Father Bill Holmberg. Father Bill Holmberg eventually became the chaplain for the Caron Institute. And Caron Institute is in Reading, Pennsylvania. It's a rehabilitation center for drug and alcohol abuse. And how I got to know him is because Father Bill Holmberg actually was a Korean War veteran. He came into the Marines through the Navy as a Navy. He was in the Navy, and he was part. You know, the Navy does not. The Navy provides the Marines with chaplains and medics. Mm-hmm. So he was in the Navy. He went to Korea at the end of the Korean War, and then he was actually in Vietnam. His Vietnam stories were incredible. They were almost, you can't make them up. And Father Bill Holmberg fell by the wayside. He became addicted to drugs and alcohol to the point where he had to go into rehabilitation. After he came out of rehabilitation, he went on a mission to save people. And he became the chaplain, which he just retired from. Father Bill's 81 years old. He's still in great shape. And he became the chaplain at the Caron Institute, where he does rehabilitation on people that have addictions. And he's understanding of it. He understands the disease of addiction, and he's very honest with the people. And I interviewed him on my show. I also interviewed a priest who wrote a story about the Nativity. And he also, the priest I know, he's a Villanova priest. He was in Hiroshima right after the bombing, and he was the parish priest at Hiroshima. And he told stories about how many of the priests, many of the people there had no families. The Japanese soldiers came home. I'm not being sympathetic here, I'm just telling a story. The Japanese soldiers came home from the war and their families were gone entirely. So he was many of the children there were orphans. So he was one of the most interesting people. I've also interviewed college presidents, the president of Eastern University, the president of Drexel Law School. I've interviewed, I know you're not asking me, but I'm just telling you anyway.
That's great. And you also attended Villanova
yes,
and Cabrini, correct?
That's correct. I'm at Villanova. I went to Villanova as an undergraduate student, and then I went to Villanova and Cabrini as a graduate student. Combined. I went to 2 different places.
That's great. Now, tell everybody when your show is in case they don't know it.
We're on Channel 21 in Radnor and Lower Merion, Tuesday and Wednesday night at 7 o'clock.
Okay.
And we're outside of Radnor and Lower Merion, we're on Verizon on Channel 21.
And of course,
7 o'clock.
everything makes it to YouTube at some point.
Yes, and this weekend I interviewed a Pearl Harbor survivor, Frank Kane, and he'll be on. I'll have him on as a guest this week.
That's great. So where do you go from here? Any future projects?
Yes, so I do. We have the SEPTA project we're working on. I was approached by a man who wants to do a documentary about. He's a Vietnam veteran, and he's part of a Marine division that was in a raid and let me see if I can get this, Lan Ban, Vietnam, and in that raid there were 125 Marines surrounded literally like Custer's last stand by about 2,500 North Vietnamese soldiers, and the lieutenant in charge, who ultimately was awarded a Navy Cross. His name is George Marshall, and he eventually became the head of the stock exchange, and he gave the orders for the Navy not to send any incoming, that they would fight their way out. The Marines fought their way out of this little-known battle. There were 5 casualties in the battle, five killed. I don't know how many were wounded, but they all survived. And this lieutenant, Marshall, got the Navy Cross. This man, he's a Philadelphia resident, lives in Haddonfield, New Jersey now, has contacted me and asked me about doing a documentary regarding this. He would also like to do a second documentary, which we are also working on, about Father Judge. A lot of people don't know that Father Judge High School in Philadelphia had 27 of their students killed in Vietnam.
I had no idea.
No, Edison had 55. Edison High School had 55, and it's the most in the United States. So those are 2 other projects, and of course the SEPTA project I'm working on.
Okay, so we're gonna.
That's really enough for me to handle.
That's
right
enough.
now.
We're gonna look out for your projects in the future. We're gonna watch your TV show every week, and be on the lookout for future documentaries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John Ricciutti. Thank you for joining us tonight on Radio Voice Italia.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It was a great food here. God bless you and Merry Christmas.
Oh, thank you. Current up-to-date music for a few minutes here. Some more stuff coming your way you're going to like here on Radio Voice Italia.
I just want to say ciao, Radio Voice Italia. This is Denise Montana. Take it away, Joe.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Joe told me of this Italian blessing that he heard from his grandmother, and we thought that we would start ending our show with this. Here goes. May your life be like good wine, tasty, sharp, and clear. And like good wine, may it improve with every passing year.
This is Radio Voice Italia, USA. Radio Voice Italia is a production of Sputnik Sound Productions.